Tricameralism is the practice of having three legislative or parliamentary chambers. It is contrasted to unicameralism and bicameralism, both of which are far more common. The term was used in South Africa to describe the parliament established under the apartheid regime's new South African Constitution of 1983. Other instances of tricameral legislatures in history include Simón Bolívar's model state. The word could also describe the French Estates General, which had three estates. South African tricameralism. In 1983, South Africa's apartheid government put forward a constitution providing for a tricameral legislature. On the 2nd of November, around 70% of the country's white population voted in favor of the changes. Black South Africans were not consulted, and under the proposal they continued to be denied representation since in theory they were citizens of independent or autonomous Bantustans. The South African tricameral parliament consisted of three race-based chambers: House of Assembly, 178 members, reserved for whites; House of Representatives, 85 members, reserved for colored or mixed-race people; House of Delegates, 45 members, reserved for Indians. The creation of the tricameral parliament was controversial on two fronts. On the one hand, many white conservatives disliked the idea of non-whites participating in parliament at all. The dispute was a factor in the creation of the Conservative Party, a breakaway from the dominant National Party. On the other hand, many coloreds and Asians rejected the system as a sham, saying that the chambers reserved for them were powerless. The tricameral parliament was not particularly strong. The 1983 constitution significantly weakened the powers of parliament, and abolished the position of prime minister. Most authority was transferred to the state president, including the ability to appoint the cabinet. This was seen by many as an attempt to limit the power of coloreds and Indians. Not only were the non-white houses of parliament less powerful than the white one, but parliament itself was subordinate to a white president. Bolívar's tricameralism. Simón Bolívar, the South American revolutionary leader, included a tricameral legislature as part of his proposals for a model government. Bolívar described the three houses as follows: Chamber of Tribunes, holding powers relating to government, finance, foreign affairs, and war. The tribunes would, unlike the other two houses, be popularly elected. Senate, an apolitical body holding powers to enact law, supervise the judiciary, and appoint regional officials. Bolívar believed that the Senate should be hereditary, saying that this was the only way to ensure its neutrality. There are parallels between Bolívar's Senate and other chambers such as the British House of Lords. Censors, a group who would act as a check against the powers of the other two. Bolívar described them as prosecuting attorneys against the government in defense of the Constitution and popular rights. He also said that they should ensure that the executive was functioning satisfactorily, perhaps having powers of impeachment. Bolívar intended his model government to function as a parliamentary system, and so the tricameral parliament was expected to govern through the active administration of the cabinet ministers who would be accountable to it. Bolívar was explicit in many of his writings, particularly in his message to the Congress of Angostura on how his proposed system was meant to reflect the way the British parliamentary system works. His proposal for censors was not for them to act as legislators but rather to act as an office similar to an ombudsman. As such, some opinions differ on whether his system could truly be classified as a tricameral parliament, considering that the censors weren't true legislators but seemed to represent a separate branch of government altogether. Despite Bolívar's huge influence in South America, no country in the region employs his tricameral parliament. Early attempts to implement the model, such as in Bolivia, were not successful. although the chaos of the period was likely a factor in this outcome. As a result of not adopting Bolivar's British-inspired parliamentary system, numerous celebrated political scientists like the late Juan Lintz and many others have observed that the decision of many Latin American countries to model the systems of government on the presidential system of the United States has led to numerous examples of political instability, and subsequent descent into dictatorship or anarchy. French tricameralism, ancient regime. Some historians view the French States General as an example of a tricameral legislature. The States General evolved gradually over time, and provided advice on various matters to the king. The three estates were simply labeled first, second, and third. There are problems with regarding the States General as a tricameral legislature, however. Firstly, the States General never had any formal powers to legislate, although at times, it played a major role in the king's legislative activity. Secondly, the division between the three estates was not always maintained. The estates sometimes deliberated separately, but at other times, they deliberated as a single body, undermining the idea of tricameralism. Consulate. The French consulate had a tricameral legislature, consisting of the Sénat conservateur, the highest chamber, whose duty was to guard the constitution, and which upon the consul's proposal could enact special laws known as Senatus Consultis. The corps legislatif, successor to the Directoires Conseil des Anciens, which was to vote on laws without discussing them. The Tribunat, successor of the Directoires Conseil des Cinq Cents, which was to discuss laws and only vote on whether to recommend them for the corps legislatif. Whether the Sénat was part of legislature, however, is open to doubt, because CI has described it as belonging to an altogether different power beyond the executive, legislative and judiciary, the conservative power. In effect, Napoleon made the Sénat into a political elite to back his power as consul and later as emperor, whereas the other two chambers were subdued into submission. In 1807, the tribunate was definitely abolished. Republic of China tricameralism. According to the original constitution of the Republic of China, under the National Assembly, there are 5 branches of government, named Yuan, which are the Executive Yuan, Legislative Yuan, Judicial Yuan, Examination Yuan, and Control Yuan. The National Assembly represented the entire nation and exercised the political rights thereof, but its legislative functions were considered reserve powers that were meant to be exercised on an ad hoc basis. The Legislative Yuan is the principal and standing legislative body, and the Control Yuan is the monitors of the government. However, the Constitution did not mention which is the parliament of the country. The Judicial Yuan decided that the National Assembly, Legislative Yuan, and Control Yuan resembled the parliament. Originally, the Control Yuan was elected, but later became nominated by the president. After the suspension of the National Assembly, the Legislative Yuan became the current unicameral parliament. Other examples. Former Yugoslavia. The Socialist Republic of Croatia had 3 houses of parliament: Socio-Political Council, Council of Municipalities and Council of United Labour. This was abolished by the new constitution as Croatia gained independence in 1990. Isle of Man. The Parliament of the Isle of Man, Tynwald, is sometimes called tricameral, but this description is not universally accepted. The 2 commonly accepted houses of Tynwald are the House of Keys and the Legislative Council, but according to some, the Tynwald Court counts as a 3rd house. Others disagree, saying that as there are no members of the court who are not also members of the other houses, the court should not be considered separately. Church of England. The General Synod of the Church of England is sometimes described as tricameral. It is divided into a House of Bishops, the House of Clergy and the House of Laity. as the Church of England is the State Church of England. The Parliament of the United Kingdom has given the General Synod the power to make law relating to the Church. However, a diocesan synod is not a tricameral institution. It is a bicameral institution, as it consists of the House of Laity, who are directly elected by the parishes, and the House of Clergy. The bishop is not a member of either house, even though he is constitutionally a member of synod. Labor unions. Tricameral meeting arrangements are a growing trend in labor unions where some members will always be working on one of 3 shifts. Under such arrangements, each shift will have its own meeting, but the action of one meeting will have to be adopted by the other 2.